And if you can also pull up once you get to the Padlet, on the left-hand side is going to be 2-hour differentiation participant webinar guide. And we're going to be using that today. So be brave and let's share and have good discussions today. With that being said, this is what your Padlet looks like. And you'll see here on the left-hand side that your participant guide is there. If you can go ahead and have that downloaded and pulled up, that would be great. It looks like this. And once you have that, then you should be good to go. All right, so we're challenged right now by a new definition of teachers and what we do and what we are, especially in the environment that we're in now with long distance learning, with school from home. And I think this quote really speaks to us as teachers and the definition of what we are. It says, it isn't someone who teaches something, but someone who inspires the student to give their best in order to discover what they already know. And unfortunately, in the environment that we're in now, we sometimes can't control the environment for our students. So it's our job to make sure that they can discover what they already know and that we inspire them to be that brave. Okay, so that being said, here are our objectives today. And on some slides, you'll notice a page number in the right-hand corner at the top, and that correlates to the page in your participant guide. So these are listed for you on page 3 of your participant guide. Today, we are going to describe how content, product, process, and environment are considered for language differentiation. We're going to identify student language differentiation needs and supports based on their proficiency levels. We're going to describe some pathways for language differentiation, and we're going to describe how scaffolds and supports engage language learners at various levels in the language of a lesson, and also apply strategies to balance domains. So, let's talk just a little bit more about logistics for today. Here is a picture of your webinar packet that's available on the Padlet. You also have access on the Padlet to the 2012 WIDA Standards Book and also the Essential Actions Handbook. Now, these are wonderful resources for you. And not only are these included on the Padlet, but y'all, there's stuff from people all over the world who have shared different resources that might be useful to you. This Padlet is really like a treasure chest. So make sure that you go there and visit and kind of dig through that information. It's going to be really, really helpful to you. Also, I want to let you know about the virtual parking lot that we have. This is a place where you can go and ask questions that I don't cover today. I know if you guys are like me, sometimes when I hear a lot of information at one time, I need time to process it, and then that's where my questions start coming once I've had time to process. If you're like that, like me, then this is a perfect place for you to ask questions. This is checked on every single day, and the questions are answered for you. So please feel free to use the virtual parking lot if you need it. As we're together today for the next 2 hours, if you have something that you'd like to share, I don't mind being interrupted at all.
Talia, also, I'm
yes,
sorry.
That's okay. See how easy that is to interrupt. Go ahead.
So there was a great question on the chat that I just kind of want to bring up. They asked if they would have access to the Padlet after the session is over. And so long as you guys have the web address, that never changes, and you'll always have access to the Padlet. As a matter of fact, it is an evolving document. and it is constantly being updated, and it's constantly, we're getting more things from teachers just like you guys that we put up there for additional resources, things like that. So yes, I mean, hold on to this, maybe bookmark, you know, the URL, and that way you'll always have access to it. And then you can, you know, you can take it and you can, you know, reference it, you know, later.
Yes, absolutely. Take what is there to use. And also, if you have something that you think you want to share, you can add that to the Padlet as well. All right, so first things first, let's get to know each other. Now, I'm about to launch a Zoom poll, and I would like for you to tell me what your area of focus is. So, are you elementary, like me? Are you middle school, high school? And are you international? I'm sorry, did somebody say something? Okay. So international high school, international elementary, or international middle. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll for you guys, and just put in the radio button what your area of focus is, and we'll kind of see where we're all coming from today. This part's so exciting to me. All right, looks like 75% have voted so far. So just take a second and let us know what your area of focus is on the poll here. And I'll give you about.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I actually work across the whole school, so it's K to 12, and there is no option over here for that. So how do I choose?
You are exactly right. What I would do if I were you is just let us know in the chat box if you work across all grades. Then just stick that in the chat box so we'll know what your area of focus is.
All right, thank you.
You are welcome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and let you guys see where we are. It looks like most of us are K-5. That is actually my area of focus too. I did spend some time in middle school. I taught algebra to 8th graders for a while. And then I taught in a high school for one day, because that is just not where my heart is. But you guys that are middle school people and secondary people, my hats are off to you. You do such important work. So I'm going to go ahead and take this away. And now that I know kind of where we are coming from and a little bit about you guys, I want to share just a little about me. So my name is Talia Gray. I'm from Gainesville, Georgia. I've been teaching for 16 years, and I have taught for 15 years at the same school, and I'm currently set to go back to school on August 3rd. My school's name is Sugar Hill Academy in the Hall County School District here in Gainesville, Georgia. And you can see by these pictures, this sort of encapsulates who I am as a person. I identify as being a wife, a dog mommy, and a teacher. I'm also a stepmommy, but I don't have my beautiful stepdaughter's picture on here. So that's a little bit about me. Now, the next question is I would like for you guys to describe how you're feeling today. I want you guys to choose one of these cute, cute babies' pictures and tell me which one sort of encapsulates your feelings for today. And I don't remember if I have a poll for this. I think I do. Let's see. No, I do not. So if you'll just in the chat box put which number you feel like this morning, we can, You're a 4. I am a 4 too. People sometimes tease me about being a 4 constantly, all the time, every day.
She is always a 4. It doesn't matter what happens.
But that's just how I operate.
If you're a 1 or a 5, I don't want you to be scared. You go ahead and you type that. Because it is okay to be a 1 or a 5 sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. So I do see a 1. I see lots of 4s. There's a 3. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? I'm a 3 and a 4. Oh, that's good. 2 and a 4. So hopefully by the end of our time together today, you'll all be 4s and so excited to put some of these strategies into practice. Now I want to start off today by asking you, who needs language differentiation? I'd like for you to think of a student that you have now or have had in the past who really needs language differentiation, who would benefit the most from language differentiation. Now, if you don't have any multilingual learners or English language learners in your class, it can be someone who's in a coworker's class or just a person that you know. And I want you to get this student in your mind. So, internally process why you chose this student. Why would this student be more successful with language differentiation? And finally, what does this student bring to your classroom? So I'm going to give you about a minute to think about this. You'll find a graphic organizer on page 4 of your webinar packet if you want to write some notes down. And I'd like for you to share your answers to the second question, to number 2, in the chat box. So I'm going to take my camera off and let you guys think for a few seconds. All right, guys. So go ahead and share in the chat box why the student that you're thinking of would benefit from language differentiation. Because they would be working at their level, absolutely. Oh, Leela, I'm a shelter DSL teacher. All my kids need language differentiation. Me too. I know how you feel. The student would be more successful with language differentiation, so they have the same opportunity of understanding as my other students. SLIFE students, yes.
I don't understand. What is SLIFE students? Could you expand on that just a little bit?
Yes, Jennifer, if you will, I think that was Jennifer. If you will explain what that means to us. No, that wasn't Jennifer.
It was Rachel.
Rachel, okay.
And Rachel, feel free to open your mic if you have it available.
Oh, yes. Hi. So I'm an EL teacher, and so I have SLIFE students, which are students with limited and limited formal instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that in their native languages, they have limited literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So as an EL teacher, so I have English language learners. So I'm already differentiating for them, but I have to even further differentiate and I teach high school. So then within the classroom, I'll have students who are at more of a fundamental level of literacy in their native languages as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Where do you teach?
In Rockland, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I've just,
Yeah.
Everybody's got different, acronyms and, different ways of referring to the same thing. And so I've never heard the term SLIFE before. So
Yeah,
thank
there's
you.
SLIFE, and then some people use SIFE or SLIFE. So it means.
And thank you, Rachel, so much for sharing that with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I'm seeing in the chat box a lot of people who are saying their students would benefit from language differentiation so that they could have access to the content, so that they would be more confident. And a lot of other reasons why students would be more successful with language differentiation. And I agree with you guys. I'm also, at my school, we call it ESOL. So I teach English language learners and multi-language learners from grades K to 5. And you're right, they would all benefit from language differentiation. So keep this student that you have in your mind, because we're gonna come back to this in a few minutes. All right, now this section, we're going to be talking about differentiation from a general education perspective, and we're going to kind of go over what differentiation is. So if you can look on page 4 of your participant handbook, you'll see that there's a graphic organizer there, and this is just a quick thought for you. So think about what you already do to differentiate. Think about what you want to be able to do, and share some difficulties with us that you experience. Now, I know already, before you guys even say anything in the chat box, that time is always an issue. If teachers had more than 24 hours in a day, then we would fill up all the extra hours too. So time is an issue now, and it probably always will be in our profession. But think about some of the other difficulties that you experience, and then share those with us in the chat box. And I'm going to give you about a minute here to think about what you already do, what you want to be able to do, and some difficulties. Okay, Maria, I see that your hand is raised. Do you want to share something with us? Please unmute yourself if you like.
No, sorry, I was gonna tap chat. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. No problem.
It's all good. Sometimes you just need to wave your hands in the air like you just don't care. Deborah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wrote it in the chat. Maybe I'm in the wrong place, but I guess I'm in the wrong packet. The packet that I'm looking at has the WIDA Can Do thing on the page 4. Is there a different place that I should be looking? I downloaded the thing that says Introduction to Collaboration.
Okay, yes, that's actually the wrong packet. What you need is 2-hour differentiation. The participant hand guide for the 2-hour differentiation, not the collaboration.
Thank you.
And Sam has put the Padlet address there in the chat box for you if you guys need that again. Aisha, I see that a difficulty you have is being able to work with all your kids every day. I want to successfully run small groups based on WIDA access scores. That's a great strategy. The different academic level of English language students in the room, that is definitely a difficulty. I want to be able to differentiate in the mainstream classroom across the various subject groups for EAL learners school-wide. Yes, I don't have much experience with ELL students, so I'm not sure where to start support. I'm hoping this webinar helps. It will. It definitely will. All right, so you guys can see in the chat box, we are experiencing lots of difficulties, and that's okay. This is not an easy job. So, we are going to have difficulties throughout our careers, but hopefully, you guys will be able to sort of get a handle on differentiation for today. So, I'd like to share with you this quote from Carol Ann Tomlinson. She is an expert in differentiation. If you ever need a home learning opportunity, I highly suggest that you seek her research and read some of the things that she has to say about differentiation. She says to differentiate is to tailor the presentation of content, process, product, and or learning environment based on readiness levels, interests, and learning profiles to provide success, and this is the biggie, and challenge for all students. So let's kind of break down differentiation and what it means. When we're differentiating, we can differentiate content, process, environment, and product. Now, one thing I want to tell you guys, as we're going through our webinar today, I really want you to use two lenses to look at this information. One, think of the brick and mortar setting that we're used to. And then as we go through today, I really want you to think about how we can use this information to help us with our digital learning. I know that my school is going back as scheduled on August 3rd, but as a district, we know that there probably will come a time where we have to transition back to digital learning. So sort of keep that in mind as we go through today. Now, differentiating content is we are considering what the student needs to learn or how the student will get access to the information. Now, this first bullet point is very important. Standards remain the same for all students. All students have the same content standards, so we have to remember that when we're differentiating. Differentiation of content refers to making the same content more acceptable, more accessible through a variety of supports and scaffolds. So next, let's talk a little bit about differentiating process. Now, process is how students learn. So these would be activities in which the student engages in order to make sense or master the content. Now, some of the strategies and structures used to teach and practice the content would be a variety of cooperative learning structures. Someone mentioned making groups based upon WIDA access level scores. That's a great idea. You could have assigned tasks based on learning styles or level of complexity. And you could also in your class move between large and small groups, partner individual activities. I know in my brick and mortar setting, one thing that I do a lot is reading conferences. So I use those reading conferences as a place to address where students need more support and also try to accelerate those students who are ready to study something in more depth. When we differentiate product, that's the end result. So to me, now in the environment that we are in now with distance learning and not really knowing where our students are coming from, this is the easiest way to differentiate. So when you differentiate product, that's the end result, the culmination of everything. Some things you could do are give students the choice between written reports, speeches. Graphic organizers are a fantastic way for students to show what they know. Also some visual products. I know when I was in school, I loved to get up in front of the class and teach what I know and play that I was a teacher. So luckily, the teachers that I had when I was a little girl gave me those opportunities.
No, no. Right here,
Okay.
right here's where it's best and where I'm at now.
Okay, so the next one used to be the easiest way to differentiate, for me anyway. This is talking about differentiating your environment. When you differentiate your environment in a brick and mortar setting, you have control of your classroom. So this would be making places where students can work quietly versus students who need to talk things out. This would be things like flexible seating, or knowing and acknowledging that some students, some learners need to move around to learn. Some learners do best by sitting quietly. So what was the easiest to me, differentiating environment, is now the hardest. When I think about the students in my school and their digital learning environments, I can't control that anymore. I know a lot of my students don't have happy homes to go to. So this is something that I really am going to work on in the next few months, which is trying to differentiate where they are and keeping that in mind as I'm doing distance learning. So again, what was the easiest has now become the hardest for me. So how is language differentiation different?
Talia,
Yes.
we had a good question in the chat, and I think it would make for good conversation is, do you have any ideas coming up for how we will do this in the era of distance learning and even within schools, 6 feet of separation? And I don't, I know Talia feels the same way. We don't have all the we don't have all the answers. So I kind of even want to just open this up to the whole group. What kinds of ideas do you guys have that have been successful in differentiating with distance learning, or even ideas that maybe your school or your district has come up with for when you go back to the brick and mortar building?
That's great discussion that we could have. You're absolutely right. One thing that was important for me as a co-teacher when the students were in distance learning, my homeroom teachers and I would set up Zooms, and the students who came, we would then put into different Zoom rooms. And I would have a reading conference with a child, and then their homeroom teacher would come into that room and kind of talk through it with us. Now, let me say, this took a long time. It also took a lot of trial and error. This time that we're in right now, I always say necessity breeds invention. So it's very frustrating, but it's also a chance for us to learn and grow. So if anybody has any ideas that they want to share right now with distance learning, please open your microphone and share with us, or put it in the chat box.
Because some people, I know in where I'm from, I used to teach in Clark County in Nevada, and I know some of you guys are from Clark County, can't talk this morning, and they were not allowing us to use Zoom.
Oh, wow.
I now moved to Nye County, and if we wanted to use Zoom, it wasn't the district supported format, because they're Google heavy. So any other ideas besides the Zoom? Because I can see a lot of you guys are saying Zoom is an awesome one.
For me, luckily in the district where I am, that's one of the tools that they gave us, was to use Zoom. There are tons of different ways. maybe calling students on the telephone. I'm not as familiar with Google Classroom because we don't use that in my district. But okay, so I'm seeing Jacqueline says my school didn't allow Zoom either.
Yeah.
Google was terrible for us. Oh no, our school purchased a Zoom license for everyone instead. My district uses Microsoft Teams and Google Meet. To call on the phone, get a Google phone number. Good tip. Google Meet was a challenge. But you can create man-made Google rooms, but they are tough to navigate. When they work, they're great. Isn't that
one thing I did with the Google, because again, I had I have to use Google Classroom and Google Meets. Is I did schedule one-on-one time with my students who I knew really needed it. But that is a very time-consuming process, and I would have to arrange the meet with the parent to ensure that the child showed up. So it has its own set of challenges for sure.
Yes. So I'm loving that you guys are sharing this stuff. And as we go along today, please keep it coming. Deborah, do you have something that you want to say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with Google Meet and Zoom and stuff, but I think that we also need to think about some more concrete things. Like I was talking with a colleague about how in our background we can have vocabulary in the background. There can be consistency in terms of what we do each day, so that consistency makes sure that the kids can clue in. Because like, for example, today, when we started this whole meeting, I had the wrong packet. I'm trying to navigate this, that, and the other, and then I have to get back in. Unfortunately, I have all of the things that I need to be able to get back in. But if one of my students doesn't have that, then they're lost for the whole class. So what am I going to do, and what are we going to do to make sure that we don't lose them, to make sure that everything is very consistent and that we have language behind us constantly? I don't know how to make that beautiful background that you have right there, but I think there are some things that we can do, and I'd love some tools from people to make it so that every day they walk into my room, which is going to be virtual, I assume, and that they feel like, oh, I can get this.
So I can answer where I got this background, and that is the WIDA website. So feel free to download any of those backgrounds they have. I think that we are right now just going to have to give each other and give our students and give our district leaders and give everybody just a little grace. We're all getting through this together. No one has any idea what the future is going to hold for us. So I think that just being patient and having some sort of understanding is going to be so important for us. To me, the most important thing that we as teachers can do, whether our students are in our classrooms or not, is let them know that we are here for them. And, you know, it's so hard to get everybody on board. I know that some Zooms that I was on, y'all, that out of a class of 25 kids, there'd be 2. And it's frustrating, but we have to just keep in mind that our students need us. So whatever it takes for them to know that you are there, that's what's important. And that doesn't answer your question at all. I'm sorry. But, you know, I think that just giving each other grace is going to be the biggest thing for us to get through this. And, you know, we have a lot of technology, which is fantastic. So I think that things are going to get better. I think that students, the more they practice with digital learning tools, the more comfortable that they'll be. So that's a good thing. I think once parents know that we're not here to judge or to grade their students, really, as far as like the technology aspect of everything, I think that we just need to have some practice and kind of move through slowly and expect that it's not going to work out. While knowing that it is going to work out, it's just going to take some time. Okay, so I am going to move on. And the next thing we're going to talk about is WIDA's guiding principles. Okay, so if you will look on page 5 of your participant guide, I want you to consider WIDA's guiding principles. Now, there's one of these that specifically attends to language differentiation. So I want you to take a moment and just read all 10 of these. I'll put a slide up that has them if you guys are having trouble with the packet. And take a few minutes to review all 10, and then I want you to respond to the poll. Which one do you think speaks directly to language differentiation? So I'm going to put the next slide up and then launch our poll. So we're looking at the guiding principles here. They are on page 5 of your packet, and they're also listed here for you. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to look through these, and then I'm going to launch our poll. I'm going to stop my video too. All right, if you will go ahead and tell me which guiding principle speaks directly to language differentiation. All right, it looks like 40% have voted. I'll give you about 25 more seconds to put your vote in. I'm seeing some votes in the chat box too. The right answer is in the chat box right now, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. And most people got it right. Guiding principle number 5 specifically speaks to language differentiation. So good job, guys. Now, guiding principle number 5 says that multilingual learners use and develop language when opportunities for learning take into account their individual experiences, characteristics, abilities, and levels of language proficiency. So those of you who put number 6, I totally get where you're coming from. When I was a participant in this workshop, I put number 6 too. But number 5 speaks directly to language differentiation. All right, so as we move on, in your packet on pages 6 through 10, these are some online resources that WIDA has provided for you. These provide examples of online platforms that are supported by each guiding principle. So when you have time, go through these and look at them, and you will probably find some resources that you can use during digital learning. So that's a great resource for you. All right, so language differentiation is the process of adjusting your instruction so that the language demands of a task are varied, this is important, while cognitive challenge is maintained. So you are probably sitting there thinking, how do I even start? Where do I even start? Well, you start with your students. Now, when you are getting to know your students, it's important to put yourself in their shoes and really try to understand where they're coming from. Now, with that being said, I want to show you this next graphic. This sort of shows the difference between equality and equity. Now, if you look at the top row, every single one of these 4 people gets the same bicycle. That's equality. Everybody gets the same thing. Now, if you notice, only 1 out of 4 of those people can ride the bicycle comfortably. So if you look at the next graphic down below, you see that this is an example of equity. Not everybody gets the same bicycle. Everybody gets the bicycle that they need. So try to think of this through a lens of your classroom. Being equal is not the same thing as being equitable. Equality is everyone receiving this exact same bicycle, even though only 1 of the 4 can ride it. Equity, on the other hand, is everyone receiving something that's catered to their individual needs. The result of that is that all 4 of those people can ride a bicycle. So really keep that in mind. Now, that brings us to WIDA's can-do philosophy. So I want you to take a moment just to kind of read through this, and then we're gonna talk about it some more. So for 1 minute, I'm gonna take my camera away so that you guys can read this, and then we're gonna talk about it. If I can find the camera, there it is. Okay, so hopefully you had time to at least skim the WIDA can-do philosophy. And if we were going to have to sort of sum it up, if you look on page 11 of your participant handbook, this is where you can kind of explain it in your own words. We're not going to take time for that right now, but the gist of the can-do philosophy is that everyone brings valuable resources to the education community. Linguistically and culturally diverse learners bring a unique set of assets that have the potential to enrich the experiences of all learners and educators. So this can-do philosophy really sums up what WIDA is all about, and that is everyone brings something to our classrooms, everyone. So let's practice this a little bit. Now that you have read over the can-do philosophy and kind of know the gist of it, think about that student from this morning when I ask you who would benefit from language differentiation. Think about that student. And with the can-do philosophy in mind, what types of assets did you identify for that student? Now, what can you consciously revise, edit, add to your notes about that student to focus on their assets? So I want you to just kind of reflect on that and reflect on the descriptions that you gave of your students. And with that being said, we're going to practice a little bit using a can-do mindset. Now, oh my goodness, y'all, I am so sorry. Have a little grace with me too. So, the can-do mindset. Now, if we look on the left side of this graphic, we see a deficit state of mind. So, here are 2 comments about students, and we're going to work on changing this into an asset-based statement. So, keeping the can-do philosophy in mind, we can see that someone describes Abdi as a slow processor. Abdi is a slow processor. Now, what could we say, keeping in mind the can-do philosophy and putting it into an asset-based kind of language? What could we say about Abdi, do you think?
I would say that he takes his time to make decisions, but he is able to weigh the pros and cons of different things before he comes to a decision. So he's always measured. I think that's an asset.
Excellent. Yes, excellent. That is a great way to use asset-based language to describe this student. So let's look at the example that we have here. Abdi is successful when he has ample time to process, which is exactly what you said. That was a great use of asset-based language. Now, look at the next one. It says, Michelle does not comprehend well when reading. What do you think we could say about that? What are some asset-based language that we could use to describe Michelle, who does not comprehend well when reading? Oh, someone has raised their hand. 2 people. Okay, I'm looking for the raised hands here. Three raised hands. Okay, let's see. Deborah, will you open your mic and share with us? Oh, maybe she didn't have her hand raised. I see Stephen in the chat box has written, Michelle thrives with visual learning devices. Excellent. The example that we have here, instead of saying Michelle does not comprehend well when reading, we could say that Michelle decodes well when reading books of interest. She can read with great fluency. And this is my favorite part. Our next steps are to work on comprehension strategies. So you can see here that the way that we speak about our students really makes a difference when we're thinking of how to help. We have to have this can-do mindset in mind. 2 years ago for New Year's, I gave up using the word low when I was talking to or about my students. I just was thinking, how would I feel if someone described me as low? That would not feel good. So it's taken me about 2 years of conscious practice to get to a point where asset-based language to me now is second nature. But it took a lot of practice. So I want you guys, when we're finished today, I want you to really reflect on the way you talk about your students and try to focus on their assets. See the good.
So, Talia, there was a question. It says, do we know for sure that she reads well when reading books of interest? Perhaps she just has different strengths in accessing information. And I just wanted to kind of address that. That is very possible, Deborah, that is the case. And it really, the responses on the right really kind of stem from what we're really trying to get at is just kind of having that personal knowledge of your students. This is not something, it's not something that necessarily as outsiders we could have ever made that judgment that she is strong at reading books of interest, because we didn't have that information. It didn't give that to you in the deficit language. It's just it really is challenging ourselves to have that paradigm shift to really start looking at the things that our students bring to the table. So, and identifying what those specific strengths are and capitalizing on them is basically. So it could have gone other ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Okay, so one fantastic way to get to know your students is using something called student portraits. Now, on page 12 of your guide, you can see the example for Gaetan. And this has a lot of information about him. And this is information that we can use when planning lessons and when thinking about differentiation. Now, I'm going to go through these a little quickly. We're a little bit behind, which is totally fine, but I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. Keep in mind, this information is in the Padlet, okay? So you have blank templates there in the Padlet. You have these examples that are in your packet. So take some time when you're digging through that Padlet to really look at these student portraits. Now, this is an example of a student portrait. You could also use a student resume. I think those lend themselves well to middle and high school. My own experience with student portraits is using them in elementary, of course, and I would try to make them with my students so that they are involved in creating this document. Now, this document is something that would follow them ideally through their schooling years, and it's also something that would help other teachers of the student, not just language teachers, not just general ed teachers, but everybody who has this student in one piece of paper kind of knows about them. So these are fantastic resources. These examples are on page 13 through 15 of your webinar packet. And then this template and this template are on the Padlet for you and in your packet as well. Now, this one is specifically for creating a class portrait. Secondary teachers, you guys have hundreds of students, like 150, 120, lots of students. You can't make a student portrait on every one of your kids. If you could, it would take you forever. So something that really works well in secondary and middle school as well is a class portrait. And this guide is there for you in the Padlet, and it will help you sort of create those class portraits. And here's another template for a class portrait. All right, so I know I went through that a little quickly, but the gist of everything is that we as educators must create equity in our classrooms. Now, this is a quote from the WIDA Focus on Differentiation that you have access to in the Padlet. And this says, educators need to begin by identifying these individual and collective strengths. And they need to know how to differentiate content and language instruction for diverse learners in order to guide them to and along productive pathways. Now, my watch or my cell phone is showing 11:57, which is Eastern time. I'd like to give you guys a 5-minute break. So I'm going to give you guys a break for 5 minutes, and I'll stay on here in case you have any questions or anything you want to discuss. Please feel free to get up and stretch, do some yoga, take your dog outside, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. And we'll get started again in 5 minutes, which will be 12:02 or 11:02 if you're in Central.
And I'll provide some baby cuteness for you guys.
All right, so it has been 5 minutes. So we are going to go ahead and get started. And now we're going to kind of shift our attention to discussion on academic language. Academic language, analyzing the language of our content areas and our instructional tasks. So, think about what you know about academic language already. Now, this graphic organizer is on page 19 of your webinar packet. And I'd like to, in your own words, kind of describe what you think academic language is. You can give some characteristics of it and some examples of it if you like. Also, what is not academic language? So use your participant guide to take notes. It's on page 19. And also, if you want, if you can, give a few examples of what you think academic language is in the chat box. And let's get some discussion going about that. Academic language. What do you think it is? How would you describe it? And if someone would like to open their microphone and speak with your voice, then you're more than welcome to. Specific grade level content vocabulary. Excellent. Excellent. Subject specific vocabulary words. Good. Is the language of school and textbooks. Yes, Leela, that's how I would describe it too. School talk is what I used to, when I was a homeroom teacher, we would talk about how school talk is different from the way that you talk to your friends on the soccer field. It's different from the way that you talk to your dog. It's different. School talk is different. Specific to content area. Excellent. You guys really have a good handle on what academic language is, and that's fantastic. Language needed to understand instruction and complete assignments. That's it in a nutshell. Formal register, exactly. Very good, Vilma. All right, so now I want to introduce to you WIDA's English Language Development Standards, and these are on page 20 of your participant handbook. And just real quick in the chat box, tell me what word you see most on this page. What word do you see most on this page? I'll give you a hint. It's in bold. Which word? Communicate. Excellent. Communicate. So WIDA's English Language Development Standards are basically saying that a student should be able to communicate the language of language arts, the language of social and instructional language, the language of math, the language of science, the language of social studies. So these English language development standards are very broad, and there's a reason for that. These are not a standalone document, and they should be used in conjunction with your content standards. So academic language, that serves as a bridge between the English language development standards from WIDA and the academic standards that you have to teach to every student. So language instruction is here, content instruction is here, and when you put those together, what is in the middle is that academic language. Now, I'm going to give you a quote from Bailey and Heritage about academic language, and I'm going to read this out loud to you. It says, one very important way we must come to use language is in order to access and engage with the school curriculum. While social uses of language are still important for interaction with peers and teachers in school, often the language of the classroom and of textbooks is characterized by a more formal register, a specific way of talking. And that's where those vocabulary words and specific syntax comes into play. for a particular language function or a particular context. This case all for acquiring new knowledge in school. So that academic language is our bridge between language instruction and content instruction. All right, so let's take a few minutes to talk about academic language and context. Now, this graphic is excellent. It's on page 21 of your webinar guide, and this is the features of academic language in the WIDA standards. So this sort of sums up kind of what academic language is for us as language teachers, or for teachers of multilingual learners or English language learners. So let's take a closer look at how this is conceptualized. Now, if you look on page 21, this is where you'll see the charts. And academic language is a huge topic. And WIDA tries to essentialize and make it more manageable for teachers. Now, if you look here, you can see that the 3 dimensions of academic language are within this sociocultural context for language use. And it involves the interaction between the student and the language environment. So you're going to see register, genre and text type, topic, task, situation, and participants' identities and social roles. So that kind of orangey, grayy box, that whole thing is the sociocultural context, okay? So within that, your first dimension is the word phrase dimension. Now, here you'll see that this includes vocabulary usage that is aligned with some sort of content. So this also includes specific and technical language, multiple meanings of words and phrases, formulaic and idiomatic expressions, nuances and shades of meaning, and finally collocations. Now, does anyone know what collocations are? If you know, toss one in the chat box here if you know about collocations. Ladies and gentlemen, ooh, that's a good one. That's exactly right. We don't say gentlemen and ladies. We say ladies and gentlemen. Also, peanut butter and jelly. You wouldn't say that you're taking a false true test. You would say a true false test. And collocations are present in every language. So when you are sort of teaching them, we don't spend a lot of time teaching those, but you can use a collocation in their native language to sort of explain what one is. Now, also in this word phrase dimension, you have general, specific, and technical terms. So we're going to practice that. We are going to practice general, specific, and technical language. So if you look here, in math, a general phrase would be in all, specific would be the total, and technical would be the sum. Now, look at ELA, the English Language Arts. If we're using a specific term, we would say character. A technical term, we would say protagonist. What would go in that first box? What's the general term to describe a character or a protagonist? Person, Kyle O'Brien, congratulations, you have just won an Amazon gift card. If you will put your email address in the chat box, Sam can get that written down, and we will get you an Amazon gift card. Excellent. He was the first one that popped up in my chat box. So you're exactly right, is a person. Now, if we look at the next one for science, knee is general, Specific is kneecap. Now, what would that technical term be? Patella. Very good. Very good. Let me see who the first person was to get that. It looks like the first person, I can't tell. Sam, can you tell? First person who put that patella in the chat box, you're going to win another Amazon gift card. I'm feeling very generous today. And then for the last one, I'm not going to give you a prize for this one, but I will give you a hint. It starts with the same letter as person and patella. So what would be the specific term for people or demographics? Excellent. Population. You're exactly right. That's fantastic. So this chart is just a fun way to kind of see these general, specific, and technical terms. It's sort of hard to explain the difference in each one of these, but this chart to me really helps explain it. All right, so next we're going to move on to the sentence level.
Sorry, Talia, real quick. So Kyle O'Brien and Naomi Berg, those are the two that won the gift card. So I need you guys to send me your email addresses. And then Terry asked a question about the revised standards. So I just want to real quick tell everybody, revised standards because of COVID and everything and that districts have had to deal with, and that, you know, we've kind of had to adjust pretty much how we do things. The standards are still going to be released, but they're going to be released in late fall. So I wanted to address that. Sorry.
Yes, those are coming. Okay. So now let's talk about the sentence level. So at the sentence level, this is where you would focus on the types, array, and use of language structures. The types and variety of grammatical structures are important, conventions, mechanics, and matching of language forms to the purpose. So at the sentence dimension, that's when those grammatical things kind of get introduced. Now, it's sort of sometimes difficult to know examples of sentence dimension and like what is a good sentence, what is not a good sentence. So for you, we have a sentence complexity guideline. I know this was useful for me because in the lower grades, in the elementary grades, you know, it's kind of hard to assess what they write, but this helps a little bit. So this is for you in the Padlet, and it's just kind of a complexity guideline chart for grades 1 to 3. So that's there for you. And finally, let's talk about the discourse level. Now, the discourse level is sort of what we are striving for. We want students to be on that discourse level. And, oh, oopsie. Okay, sorry guys. Are you seeing my slide deck here, Sam? Okay, I think I got it fixed. Sorry about that, guys. So we want students to get to that discourse level. Here in the discourse dimension, we consider the amount of language as well as the organization and cohesion of their ideas within the message that they're trying to communicate. So the amount of speech here is very important, and also the structure of it. So as you can see here on the next slide, Linguistic complexity and discourse, these are some examples for you. So, like, this kind of shows the difference of writing based upon a purpose. So, if you'll look here in language arts, you have narratives, which are totally different from blogs, debates, and poetry. Expository essays are different as well. So, you can see those differences in what a student writes. Also in math, word problems, explanations, tables, graphs, and proofs. Science, you're going to see a lot of difference between field notes or a lab report, like in comparison with like research, published research. That looks different. Also in social studies, think about the differences between a timeline and a newspaper. So those different types come into play in the discourse dimension. And for you elementary teachers, this is something that can help you define the discourse in elementary students' writing. This is on the Padlet for you. And this gives you examples of the type of academic language that you should see based upon the task that you're giving your students. So, for example, if you are talking about comparing and contrasting, you're going to see the words something and something are the same, or something and something are different. Both have, neither has, one has. So this kind of gives you the language that you should see based upon the task that you give your students. So all of that to say, we are language architects. So if you're thinking about being a language architect, that word dimension is your bricks. Sentence dimension, that's your brick and mortar. Some of the walls are starting to come together. Now, the discourse dimension is the entire house, the bathrooms, the fridge, the curtains, the rugs, everything. So I know my own personal experience when I was a beginning teacher. I thought that it was so important to teach vocabulary, and it is. I introduced vocabulary. We did picture dictionaries. We talked about what the word means, and I would give them an example of the same word in their native language. And the more that I study this academic language chart, the more I realized that I was throwing bricks at those kids. I stopped at the bricks. And what I realize I have to do is I have to give them that mortar to put the bricks together. I have to give them the materials that they need to build that house of language. They need more than just bricks. So that was a realization that I had. And I just want you to keep this graphic in mind. Don't just throw bricks at them. You want them to have a house of language. So getting to that discourse dimension is extremely important. All right, so I want to share this quote with you next. And this says, the key to helping ELL succeed is explicit attention to the language of your classroom, the language of your content, and linguistic abilities of your learners. So one thing that I started doing when I was a general ed, a homeroom teacher before I was in my role now, as we would go through our day, I would try to call attention to the language of the different content areas. So for example, when I would start science, I'd say, okay, scientists, guess what? It's time for us to be scientists. We need to take off our reading hat and put on our scientist hat. And just that differentiation between the content area subjects, just that little thing of taking off your reading hat and putting on your science hat helped me to be more explicit in my language instruction. So little things like that are important. Now, for secondary teachers, let's say you teach Algebra 2 and your students are coming in and you're saying, oh, hi, mathematician. Hey there, put your math hat on. Whatever you need to do to call out and give explicit attention to the language of your content. That'll help your students sort of be able to differentiate between the content areas. All right, so that being said, I'd like to move on and start a discussion of WIDA's performance definitions. Now, these are on pages 22 and 23 of your participant handbook. And the performance definitions are a tool to inform educators on what students can linguistically process and produce as they move along a language trajectory. So this document can be so useful for a lot of reasons, one of which is it helps you guide those professional conversations that you have about your students. It gives you some of that asset-based language that you need to use when you're talking about your students. These can be used, like I said, for a ton of stuff. One idea that I got from an educator is she cut these into little squares. And she was a secondary teacher, and she said, okay, Sam, this is where you are now. And what we're trying to do is move you on to the next level. And this is what we're looking for in the next level. So you can use these with your kids too, with your students as well. These are separated into receptive and productive domains. So here you see on page 22, this is the listening and reading performance definitions. Now, these go from kindergarten to 12th grade. So they're a little broad. And as an educator that a kindergartner's work is going to look much different from a senior in high school. So these are what I use them most for in the past is talking about my students to other educators. What I plan to do is use these to get my students from level 1, level 2, level 3 on up to level 4, level 5, and then eventually level 6.
Talia, there was a good question when you were talking about how you had a colleague who actually did this with their students. The question was, did the teacher rephrase these for those students because the language is pretty high?
Yes, it is. And one thing that you might want to do if you are using this with students is sort of make it a little more kid-friendly for them. There is also something called the can-do descriptors that WIDA provides for us. And those are a little more kid-friendly. But again, this was a secondary teacher that used that. What I will probably do is go through and kind of make them a little more friendly for my students. Because if I give a kindergartner something that says multiple related simple sentences, an idea with details, they're going to be like, Miss Gray, I don't even understand what you're telling me. Well, what I may say is, all of my sentences are about one topic. Like that may be the language that I would use for the kid-friendly ones. You're going to have to probably go in and make a few changes as far as that goes. I'm a secondary teacher. I think that words like discourse are challenging. Absolutely, they are. Excuse me, guys. If I were teaching secondary, I would probably still try to use these words. but just give a little more background about like what they mean. So for example, you could say, well, let's say your student's name is Elizabeth. Okay, Elizabeth, yes. This is where you are in level 3 in the word dimension. So that means the words that you are using are on level 3. And then you might say something like, the sentences you are using are in level 3. Or you might say, okay, so your discourse, the way that you write and speak, is on level 3. We call discourse the way that we write and speak. Just kind of give them a little bit of background. And your students, that what they can handle and what they can't. I'm sometimes amazed at my elementary students who, use words that are way above their level. For example, one of the teachers I worked with last year, she had a rectangular rug in her classroom. And I would always say, okay, everybody, come to the rug, come for community time, whatever. She said, okay, let's all go to the quadrilateral. And that's what she called her rug. So, and that was in kindergarten. And so by the end of that year, those kindergartners knew that, not by the end of the year, by September of that year, those kindergartners knew that the rug in the shape, that's a quadrilateral. So as far as using these words versus kid-friendly terms, that's kind of all up to you. I mean, like I said, your students and what they can handle. All right, so moving on, these are the productive domains, speaking and writing. So this would be what a student produces for you. These are on page 23 of your webinar guide. And now I'd like for us to practice a little bit. And you see here that these are hints, right? These are hints for each descriptor that was in the chart. So for the productive word dimension, your level 1 says general content related words and everyday social and instructional words and expressions. And you can see that those kind of build upon each other. So they go up and everything becomes more specific and more technical. And I'm going to kind of go quickly through this. We're a little bit behind, but the good news is that you have access to these in the Padlet. So productive discourse dimension, and we are going to skip this part too. I'm sorry, y'all. Sorry. Oh gosh, y'all are probably thinking that I am crazy. Okay, so now that we've kind of briefly gone over our performance definitions, think about some of the things that I told you guys, some of the tips I told you guys about how you can use these when you're differentiating. You can use these as a tool for your professional conversations. And you guys can add these to your student portraits. How authentic and awesome would it be for a student to look at, at the beginning of this year, I was level 1 entering in the word phrase dimension. And look at me now, I'm level 4 in the word phrase dimension. So this gives you a starting point and it allows for lots of growth. One thing that I didn't do when I was a beginning teacher that I definitely do now is I'm really open about students' assessments and what their scores are. And, now that I use that asset-based language, it's easier for me to tell them, look, we got to do better. Look, these are our next steps for getting you from level 3 to level 4. It's all about how we frame it and how we present it. So you don't have to say, Johnny, you are level 1 and you're in 10th grade. That is sad. Come on, Johnny, do a little better. That's not how we speak to them. Think about the assets that they bring to you and what the steps are to get them to those next levels. All right, so this next graphic is sort of an explanation of why students are on different levels for different amounts of time. So if you look at this graphic, you can see that upside down triangle is all the things that the students should know. That's everything. That's their linguistic complexity, their language forms and conventions, that's their vocabulary uses. Now look at level 1 where the triangle is very skinny. There's not that much information that they should know in level 1. So level 1, your students aren't going to stay there for very long. They're going to move through levels 1, 2, and maybe even 3 pretty quickly. The way that I look at this is like a stick shift car. If you're driving a manual transmission car, you don't stay in first and second gear the whole time you're driving. Usually you're only in those first and second gear for just a few minutes before you eventually get to fourth gear, which you'll stay in for much longer. So that's just a visual to kind of explain why sometimes students move really, really quickly and then they sort of get stuck. I don't like to use that term, but they sort of stay for a while at one level. And the reason why that is because that blue triangle is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the levels progress. All right. Oh, good. Someone likes this graphic. That's fantastic. I like this one too. I've used this as a tool to explain to general ed teachers why students are still, sometimes they take the access or they're working with their model test and they, score level 3 still again. And it's like, it's not them, it's the depth of knowledge that they should know. So, all right, so let's sort of shift our thinking now, and we are going to move on to talking about supports for language. So, thinking about everything that we've said about academic language, ponder this quote. Time alone, simply being exposed to English at school, does not ensure academic English learning. Language learners need explicit scaffolding, support, and differentiation with language. So, your students that are in your classrooms, if they don't speak any English at all, and they come to school on the first day of school, and they just sit there all year long, then by the end of the year, they're going to know probably enough English to get by, right? Even if they have no instruction in it. But what you don't pick up from your peers, what has to be taught explicitly is that school talk. It's that academic language. A lot of times I've heard that referred to as a hidden curriculum. And I know that for content teachers, it's hard sometimes to think about language instruction while you're teaching math or while you're teaching science, but it's there. You just have to explicitly focus on it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about scaffolding and supports and what the difference is. Now, usually when I think about scaffolding and supports, I think about how one is a noun and one is a verb. So see if you can figure out which one's which as we go through here. If we're defining scaffolding, it's an educator's intentional act of building upon students' already acquired skills and knowledge to teach new skills. So you are building upon what your students already know in order to teach them something new. So that's scaffolding defined. And if we're talking about supports, then a support is the use of instructional strategies or tools to assist students in accessing content necessary for classroom understanding or communication and to help construct meaning for language. So, which one is a noun and which one is a verb? If somebody wants to open your mic and tell me which one is a noun and which one is a verb.
I think scaffolding is a verb and support is a noun.
Exactly right. Very good. You're exactly right. So on this next slide, we see pictures of each. We see pictures of scaffolding and supporting, right? So I like to think of scaffolding as building stairs. So this one with the staircase kind of speaks to me as far as scaffolding goes, because you are building. You are intentionally building, right? Now, to me, a support would be something like the GPS, because that tool is supporting me to find where I want to go. I understand and I conceptualize that I need to go a certain way to get to where I want to be, but that support of the GPS helps me to get there. So let's take a look at some types of support. Now, these are on pages 24 and 25 of your webinar guide. And these are organized into 3 different types of supports. You have sensory, graphic, and interactive. Now, are you going to be able to use a support from each category with each lesson that you teach every day? Probably not. You can't expect to wake up in the morning and all of a sudden have a specific learning plan for every single one of your students. It's not going to happen. But what you can do is start to build those supports in, start to scaffold where you can. So some of these things in the classrooms that I work in are always there. So number lines. A number line is on every wall in every classroom in my school. So that's always there. Now, the sensory objects, real life objects, are not always there. When I would use these real life objects for supports, it would be like if I were about to teach a novel like Freckle Juice, and I would make a anticipation box. So I might put in a blue marker or a hair roller or some of the things that are in that book to sort of get them excited about what we're going to do. So I definitely wouldn't use each one of these each day in each lesson. I just don't think that that's possible to do. Now, manipulatives in my classroom were always available for anyone who needed them. Now, the difference for me is I would eventually take those things away from the students who did not need them anymore. So that was my scaffolding, was giving but also taking away when it was time to take away. So this is on page 24 and 25 of your guide. Some great uses here, some great things for you to look at. All right. Now we're going to talk a little bit about balancing our domains. Now, I'm going to recall that person at the very beginning of our webinar who said that they were going to make groups based upon access scores. That is a fantastic strategy. And guess what? I do that too. A lot of times the teachers that I work with will make reading groups based upon their reading level or based upon a skill that the student needs. So, for example, we might have a comprehension group, a fluency group, a decoding group. So it's really important for you when you're creating these wonderful cooperative learning groups to balance the domains and not just focus on one. And you'll see what I mean. Now, if you look here at this pie graph, this is a sample classroom, and this is just a sample classroom from somewhere at some time. And this teacher spent a lot of time talking, apparently, because his or her students spent, that looks like nearly half the day reading. And then the other big portion of the day was spent reading. So this teacher was really focused on those receptive domains. But if you look at speaking, y'all, look how small that piece of pie is. And then look how small the writing piece of pie is. Now, one thing that I think is important as teachers of multilingual students is if we are language teachers, which we all are, really, even if you're a content teacher, and we are encouraging them to learn this non-native language, but they can't speak, that just doesn't make sense to me. So one thing I encourage you to do before this academic year starts is really reflect, really look at your practices and see if your domains are balanced. Are your children talking? Are they only reading and writing? And this is something that we really need to keep in mind with digital learning as well. Are we giving them a chance to talk to us? Are we giving them a chance to show what they know through writing? Or if your distance learning was like my district's, we gave them tons of stuff to read and tons of stuff to listen to. But we didn't give them enough time to produce that language and to produce that writing. And that is something that I'm really going to strive to work on this year. So sometime after the webinar is over, when you are looking at page 26, put down what your classroom looks like. What does your classroom look like right now? Put that down on here. And then I want you to draw another circle on this page and think about what the ideal classroom would look like. So this is a chance for you to go back and reflect later. And I highly encourage you to do that. All right, so next, we're going to talk a little bit more about the can-do descriptors. And as you can see, the can-do descriptors are separated by grade level. So your grade level 3, cluster 3 to 5 is here for you on the screen. And these go along with those performance definitions. So if you're going to use those performance definitions with your students, this may help you get some of the kid-friendly language, or you may just decide you want to use can-do statements for them. It's really up to you. These are both fantastic resources that you can use in your classroom, and use them together. They go together. The performance definitions and the can-do statements are to be used in tandem. All right, so now let's move on, and we're going to talk a little bit more about balancing domains. Now, this is an Access for ELS score report. I know some of you do not use the Access test, you use Model, and that's fine. Model's student score reports look very similar to Access, but we'll show you some Model scores in a minute. But this is on page 27 of your participant handbook. And I want you to look at the first student right here. The first student, his name is Alfonso last name. So Alfonso last name is in grades 6 through 8, because we're looking at his cluster. He is in tier A, and you can see his overall score on the Access was a 2.5. So you can see his overall score is on the right-hand side of the page. He's the first student, and his overall proficiency level is 2.5. But I want us to look at the domains. Now, we see that overall he is 2.5. And if we look by domains at his scores, we can see that in listening, he got a 2.3. Speaking 2.6, reading 1.9, and writing 3.1. So Alfonso last name has a very obvious strength here. What do you think Alfonso last name's biggest strength is? Just pop it in the chat box real quick. What is his strength? What is one of his biggest assets? And you're right, it's writing. Look at his score in writing, 3.1. That's good for Alfonso last name. Now, I want you to look at his domain scores and tell me where Alfonso last name needs the most support. Reading, you're exactly right. So it's important for you when you're creating your groups, it's very important for you to look at these domain scores instead of just that overall proficiency. Now, the overall proficiency is very useful in some situations, but I know that in my own classroom, when I am making groups, I really just make it easy, honestly. I tend to have a listening group, a speaking group, a reading group, and a writing group. Now, listening and speaking, usually those two scores those are two strengths of most of the students that I have had in the past. Not in Alfonso last name's case, though. He really has a very good writing. He's got that kind of on lock more than anything else. So that's on page 27. And then for international schools, your roster, your grade level roster is going to look like this. Now, this is very similar to the Access for ELs, but it's a little different. So you can see here, if we are looking at the first student, it looks like he has, oh gosh, my old eyes can't see, 2.8 overall score, I believe that says. And his domain scores are different as well. I mean, he has an obvious strength and an obvious place where he needs more support. Look at his speaking. If I had this student in my class, I would work on talking to him and giving him opportunities to speak. His strength is writing. So, when I'm thinking about making partner groups, I may pair him with a student who struggles more in writing, but is like a confident speaker. And that way, that would help these students would help the confident speaker get better in writing, but it would also help the confident writer get better in speaking. So these are just ways that you can kind of look at making groups. And I want to share with you little Juan here. He's so precious. It makes me miss my students terribly. And you can see if we chart his scores, his overall score is a 3.5. But look, y'all, he has got a big strength here. What is his biggest strength? His biggest strength is listening. Good. And it looks like he probably needs the most help in speaking. And honestly, the way to get better in speaking is to, guess what? Speak. So he needs to do a lot more talking. All right. So now I want to share with you this resource that you have. And this is a language differentiation planning chart. This is a way that you could sort your class based upon model or access scores according to domain. So this is a chart that I've used a lot, and it just kind of helps you to see. And it also gives a place for you to put the support that you're going to use with each group. So this is a fantastic planning chart. All right, guys. Now we are coming to the end of our webinar, and I want to just kind of go over this key learnings with you. And the biggest thing that I would like for you to take away today is that an inclusionary and equitable classroom environment means that multilingual learners or English language learners can engage in the same content learning as all other students, but at their domain specific proficiency levels. So basically, you are going to meet your students where they are. And according to where they are, that's where you start with them. Not by changing the content, but by making the content accessible. Now, here are some differentiation do's. Consider the student's language proficiency levels. Use the performance definitions to help you. You can create groups and clusters and then identify appropriate supports for each group or cluster. Now, another treasure that I would like to share with you today is pages 29 through 33 in your participant handbook. These are domain-specific strategies that can support you in all 4 domains. Now, you will see that there are tons of strategies in here. This, along with the Padlet, these are some great things that you can use and some wonderful strategies that you're really going to want to get into these and dig into these and look at them before the academic year starts. All right, so I'm also going to provide you with a home learning opportunity. I'd like for you to read the WIDA Focus on Differentiation Part 1. You can find this on pages 34 to 40 of your participant guide. This is also on the WIDA website. I highly, highly encourage you to read this. It gives fantastic information. So please, when you are finished processing everything that I've told you, read this as a home learning opportunity. And if you are like me, you may be overwhelmed right now, but don't be overwhelmed. You can't just wake up in the morning and be a differentiation superstar. Just like everything else, the journey that you're on starts with a single step. So think about one thing that you can do next year to help differentiate for your students. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. Now, some of the things that I started are almost like second nature to me, but y'all, I'm not perfect at it. For sure not. And I'm right there in the trenches with you. It's difficult, but it's worth it. We have to create the equitable environment in order for our students to learn. Now, one thing I want to leave you with is I would like for you, before you go, to write in the chat box what you would say to a colleague about this presentation that you just had. Think about how you can describe the webinar that we just had together. And I want you to write in the chat box what you would say to a colleague about this differentiation webinar. And I am going to set you free after you have written in the chat box what you would say to a colleague. You are welcome to leave the webinar. Sam and I will probably stay on for about 5 minutes after it's over to answer any questions. Please feel free to complete the survey. And also, if you guys have any questions or need me for anything, here is my email address. If I cannot answer the question, I will find the answer. I don't know it all, but I know how to find answers. So if you need to email me with questions, you're more than welcome to. Remember the parking lot, remember the Padlet, and enjoy your day. It's been fantastic. Certificate of completion, yes. You will get one of those. And I believe that it comes from WIDA, like after you log out of this. And I think it's like something that you get on your email that you can print out from WIDA. Give it a couple of days, and if you end up not getting one, like by the end of this week, shoot me an email and I'll investigate for you. Yes, Rosie, lots of information, lots of resources. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Please put the survey link in the chat. Thank you, Naomi and Karina. You guys have a good day. Thank you, Maria. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. And I hope I see some of you guys tomorrow during the lesson planning webinar. That is going to be fun, fun, fun. So if you are signed up for the lesson planning webinar, you'll see me again tomorrow. Thank you, Leela. It's wonderful. Oh, yay, Anne. Fantastic. I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, good, Jennifer. I'll see you then. Ah, Karina. Yay. I'm going to see a lot of you guys tomorrow. Fantastic. See you tomorrow, Karina. I hope I'm saying that right. Beautiful name. Vilma, you too. Yay. Oh, I'm getting jazzed about it already. Okay, Sam has put the address for the survey in the chat box. Just copy it from there and paste it in a new window. See you tomorrow, Kathleen and Beth. Thank you, Vian.